Welcome back, everybody, to another live stream. Have you ever wanted to be a frame builder or want to know the ins and outs of the business? Well, you're going to be super stoked on our guest today. We're going to be talking with Ira Ryan of Ira Ryan Cycles, who has been building frames for 17 years. That's a long time. But before we have Ira on, just a quick reminder, if you enjoy this content, please consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon. It's what keeps the lights on. We've also got some fun merch, like our Save the Front Derailleur sticker. And we're going to do a new sticker coming in the next week or so, which I think a bunch of you will love. But enough about stickers. Let's talk to Ira. Ira, welcome to the live stream.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So 17 years. That's a pretty long ass time to be doing one thing.
It's many things. It's funny. Yeah. It's like running a small business is you wear a lot of different hats. So yes, it is a long time, but it's a lot of juggling in a lot of different categories. A lot of front derailleurs.
Nice. So I think when people think frame builder, there's that very poetic image of someone welding a frame. Like, what percentage of the job is that compared to everything else?
There's a lot of different ways to set it up, but for like a one person operation, it's pretty small. Like the amount of time you spend at the bench is not as much as you would think it. It's not that romantic ratio of time spent at the bench. It's a lot of time, talking with customers. It's a lot of time planning. It's a lot of time kind of setting things up. And, ideally, like the goal of what I consider to be the goal of a good frame builder is to be super efficient with your time at the bench. So you get to the point where your systems and your process and your sequence is dialed so that you kind of approach it from a real like production mindset. And that's so it not to say that it shouldn't be a lot of time, but I think the goal is like to hit some efficiency marks with every step of the process.
So I'd be curious, like, what are some things that you did early on that were super inefficient, and then you had an aha moment and it's like, well, if I did it this way, it'd be so much easier?
Yeah, well, it's funny because in a lot of ways I consider myself to be, I don't know, I have a very like artistic mindset with a lot of stuff, and I almost think that works to a disadvantage to a degree of just like, wanting to sort of like allow myself to explore different ideas and different like custom details and all sorts of, I don't know, just to make every single bike a little different, to sort of explore the creative process takes a lot of time. So I think there are a lot of things that I figured out sort of in those early years that I sort of allowed me to hone in on what was efficient and what worked well, and how to streamline things to a degree. And I learned a lot of that in the last decade. I think like kind of thinking about the bigger picture of what it means to build frames on a bigger scale to make a scalable model really allowed a lot. It kind of pushed that envelope to be super efficient, almost to a point where, it didn't sort of check off some of those creative boxes that I appreciate being able to lean into harder now.
Yeah. I'm curious on the business end, like is there an average number of interactions? What's the average number of interactions you have with a customer? Because I feel like answering emails must take up a gang of time.
It does. It's tricky to say because I'm just getting started. Like I technically launched Ira Ryan Cycles version 2.0 in February. So I'm a month and a half in. And I have a handful of orders and which I'm stoked on. I'm really happy to be able to sort of like hit the ground running. But I haven't had, I don't know, I'm figuring out some of the kinks still and like how those customer interactions happen. One nice thing about being a one-person show again is having like a one-on-one relationship with each person that I'm building a bike for. And there's no there's no other person. I'm the person answering emails and filing the tubes and sweeping the floor and doing everything. So that part feels really nice to sort of be engaged on every single level of the process.
Yeah.
So
how long was your time at Breadwinner?
10 years. Yeah.
10 years.
Almost 9 years and 11 months or something like that. I'm just going to round up, just say 10 years.
So what was the reason for leaving?
Just, the business, the things that I appreciated about frame building and why I got into it, why I continue to be what I would consider to be a lifelong fan of cyclists or a lifelong fan of cycling and the bike industry. I'm a lifer. I was getting farther and farther away from those things. And after 10 years of being in a business relationship with another person, things just change, things shift, the landscape shifts. And I think it was just time for me to move on. So there's a lot more juice to squeeze. So I'm happy to keep squeezing that and keep doing it.
Yeah. So how is Ira Ryan 2.0 going to be different from Ira Ryan 1.0? Like what's
probably more efficient for sure. I think being able to streamline some of my processes and how I kind of approach the time in the shop and time in the admin side on the back end, just to try to make things a little bit more efficient. I have a kid now and a mortgage, so there's a lot more, there's bigger overhead issues to sort of push me to be more efficient with how things work. So yeah, like I said, I'm still sort of stretching out and kind of flexing into this new space and this new version. So it feels really great to have that opportunity, and I'm excited to see what comes of it. So
yeah. Is there going to be a particular kind of bike that is going to be your favorite to build or trademark bike for this iteration of Ira Ryan?
They're the sort of classic, very classic traditional road and gravel and cross. In my opinion, I think gravel is a little silly. I'm just going to come right out and say that because any bike can be a gravel bike. I think cyclocross and road are sort of where I have always naturally gravitated towards. Mm-hmm. But I think a big part of what I appreciate about those two styles of bikes is how applicable they are in a lot of different cases. Specifically cross, a modern cross bike can, if you build it with a certain level of functionality, it can check off so many different boxes. So, I'm deeply fascinated by the idea of bikes as tools, and bikes as utilitarian things. So I think that's a huge push for me for the styles and the styles of bikes, and sort of the intention with the bikes that I build is to make bikes that are being used. The whole rigid kind of retro mountain bike, throwback with baskets and flat bars, and just kind of using what is available to make bikes that are applicable for how people ride. That's also that's so intriguing for me. I love seeing that come back. And I don't care. I don't care if they're bikes I build. I don't care what kind of bikes they are. Of course, I want to sell bikes and I want to make a living. But more bikes. That's in my heart of hearts, is I just want there to be more bikes in the world. I don't really care what they are.
Yeah. So I remember a couple of years ago when you set the FKT for the Oregon Outback, you did it with a bike with down tube shifters. Are your leanings towards that kind of more vintagey old school, or was that just for funsies?
I definitely love the simplicity of old technology. I would say old technology, just because that's what the industry would like us to sort of see it as. But I think that there's a lot of functionality behind a simple down tube shifter, or a simple, just a mechanical shifting setup. Like, there's just so much versatility to that. And especially in a race or a ride that's 300 plus miles, like being able to limit the amount of complications you would have. The Oregon Outback ride that I did, I also had a cat-eye computer, like a wired cat-eye computer, and I basically just had a cue sheet. And like, I mean, it was the idea of like, okay, well, I'm gonna carry a Garmin, and then I have to carry like 4 extra batteries. It's like that. Like, what's the point? Like, just map it out and do your research. And I mean, it wasn't like a massive amount of navigation, but that's kind of my attitude towards that sort of thing. Like, work a little harder, be willing to just like think a little bit more critically about what you're doing and anticipate, So yeah, down tube shifters. Yes. I'm not a retro grouchy person. Like, I appreciate technology that works and has been around. I'm so bummed that Shimano and SRAM and Campy no longer offer even a system that can be modified a little bit to be used with a modern drivetrain. Mm-hmm. But it also makes opportunities to make something cool in the custom world.
Yeah. I recently just built up a bike and put down tube shifters on it. And it's been ages since I used it, and I've been taking it for a couple of rides, and it's not that bad. It was actually, it's like shifting in its most purest form. You've got like a very obvious lever that pulls the cable that moves a derailleur, and no black boxes, no mystery. And sure, you had to work a little bit more to get it into gear, but it's not like I think texting on the phone takes more like skill.
Totally. Yeah, that's awesome. What kind of bike is it? Did you build
it was this prototype bike from Money Bikes, and it's the Hachita. And the weird thing about it is that it'll take disc brakes and rim brakes, and he's got this weird plate system, so it'll take 27 700 650B rim. So it was kind of like you wanted to make a bike where you could take to any co-op, harvest parts, walk out and have a complete bike. So
that's cool. That's a really cool idea. I remember seeing the like plate adjustable, like the multiple cantilever posts location. That was pretty cool.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I set up one by, and with the left down tube shifter, I install it, even though it's not connected to anything. I think I'm gonna see if I can actuate the dropper with it, just for fun, just for funsies.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. Yeah, I think like just that, to have bicycle technology be at a place where you can play around with it, and you don't have to be like a certified professional mechanic or like an electronic engineer, but just to be able to like put pieces together and see how they work. It's just, I don't know. I've always found that like really inspiring, to be able to like put stuff together, and it just like it makes you feel like it's your thing, even if you didn't like make all the parts, you're still like assembling it, and it's like you have this like a greater sense of ownership over the experience, and you also like gain a little bit of mechanical understanding, which is self-sufficiency out in the field. And I think that's also goes a long way.
Yeah, it's like it's functional adult Legos.
Totally. Yeah.
You get to...
Yeah.
So we got a question here regarding frame building. If you were to start over today, like how would you learn? Would you go to school? And if a school, what's landscape like? If
that's a good question. If I were to start over today, I have to say, like, the amount of resources online, I mean, just like YouTube and Instagram, and just watching like Brian Chapman's Instagram feed, or it's there's so much you can glean off of that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think UBI is still around in Ashland, and I think that's a really great resource for people, whether or not you want to like make it a business, or if you just want to build a single frame. That's a really amazing resource because there's so much information, so many decades of experience that are sort of like funneled down and distilled down to like the core elements, even to the point where they will tell you like, don't go into this as a business. It is not like, it's not a great thing. So I guess that's actually another thing to distinguish is like, do you just want to build one frame, or do you want to like make it a business? A business is much harder. Obviously there's a lot more challenges to like make it a sustainable business plan. But to just build one frame, I mean, you could also just go for it, just like watch some videos and try to, don't overthink it. I think that's a lot of it. It's just like a lot of modern bike technology is so like technology heavy, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. I remember seeing a book at the Iowa City Public Library when I was in middle school that was I can't remember what the author was, but it was basically like how to build a bicycle frame. And they went through, and it was basically like, it went through step by step and showed you how to like build a plywood and wood jig. That's just like, basically you draw it out full scale, you draw your design, and then you build this frame jig out of wood that sort of holds all the pieces in the right place. And of course, this was lug technology. So the lugs basically sort of act as a holding mechanism in the fixture. And, I think there was actually one of the options for heating up the lugs and putting them together was using like a MAP gas torch. So, I mean, there's a lot of flexibility there, and having grown up on a farm and sort of that, like, well, you got to make do with what you have sort of mentality.
Right.
It dovetailed together really well. So
Nice.
I don't know if that really answered the person's question, but
how did you get into frame? Did you take a class or go to school, or were you mostly self-taught?
It was a combination of a lot of different things. I actually built my first frame in the vanilla workshop with Sasha White in 2005. I had started working in bike shops when I was 16, 17. And so I had that first job as a mechanic for 8 years. And then I've worked in various shops, and I've raced and toured, and I was like a mechanic on bike tours for a couple summers. And I don't know, I've just kind of like done a little bit of everything. So by the time that I came to the realization that frame building was something that I was kind of aware of, it was less about how to construct the frame and more about how to make the piece in the middle of all of the wheels and derailleurs and handlebars and stuff like that. Like I was kind of connecting all the bits. Because at that point, I also had a lot of experience about a lot of just shop mechanical understanding of geometry and trail and how things worked. And that's not to say that like I was a master at all. I was like, there has been a ton of trial and error in this experience. But it's also just, being able to try different stuff. So,
yeah. Let's see. All right. We've got 142 people in the live stream. If you guys have questions for Ira, put it in the comment section and I'll pass them along. So you've been building for about 17 years. I imagine at certain parts in your career, it's felt like a drag. Like what keeps you moving? Like when you're at a low point?
Just getting up and doing the work. I think that's riding is like getting on a bike and riding, like as a lifelong cyclist, like the act of riding is still incredibly, I don't know, it blows me away that it's still something that brings so much joy to me within like a mile down the road, even if it's like just pissing rain and miserable, or whatever the conditions are, it always feels good to ride a bike. It like mentally, emotionally, psychologically, all the different stuff. It riding still makes me so stoked. And you know, that changes. It's changed over time. I don't ride nearly as much as I used to, but it's still that still kind of keeps me going. That and being able to kind of understand that it doesn't matter who the person is that I'm talking to. It could be Bill Gates or somebody who's like a, I don't know, a grocery store clerk and is just like scraped together money forever. It's like talking to different people about the joy of cycling and like what it means for them to get on a bike and pedal in whatever that is, whether it's racing or commuting or whatever. That just like hearing those stories and seeing that spark in people's eyes, like that makes me so pumped. Like, just more bikes. Just please more bikes.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. Like, we at peak YouTube, I was putting out 4 videos a week. Like, I've made over 1,000 videos, and there's really like deep burnout moments. Like, a bike ride's an amazing resetting tool, but I have to be super conscious. I'm like, I'm going on a ride. I'm not going to make a video about this. This ride's just for me.
Yeah, like you really do. You have to sort of separate. It's a balancing act to be able to do it, to sort of exist in the cycling world and in the cycling universe and be able to perpetuate it, like do that thing that is kind of rebuilds you and builds up your stoke for it, but then also be able to have boundaries with it and be like, okay, what's work and what's not work, you know? Yeah. But it's also the thing that I love about this weird world that we both sort of coexist in.
Yeah. We've got an interesting question here from David. If you had a time machine, what bike would you ride for Trans Iowa? What year did you ride it, and what did you ride back then? And
I actually have I rebuilt. I just assembled, put parts back on the original frame that I rode in Trans Iowa. I did the Trans Iowa twice. I did it the first year it ever happened in 2005, and then I missed the second year, which was actually sort of fortuitous because it got rained out. Like, I can't remember what the attrition rate was, but like nobody finished. It just got like, it was just gnarly. And then I went back in 2007 and rode the same frame and won again on the same frame. So the bike that I built, it was the first frame I ever built. So it was the frame I built in Sasha's shop. And it's a lugged, I don't really know how to describe it. Like, I wouldn't call it a cross bike because I think it maxes out at like 700 by 35 tires. The wheels, the tires I ran were Schwalbe Marathons, 700 by 28s. And pretty standard like road gearing, clipless mountain bike, clipless pedals. I didn't have down tube shifters. I had like 9-speed Dura-Ace STI levers. But yeah, it had cantilevers, so it didn't have caliper brakes, but it didn't have a whole lot of room for much more than that. Right now it's set up with like 700 by 26s with fenders. It's basically kind of like my winter road bike. The big thing about that is that it has like a lower bottom bracket, which I thought felt really, I still feel pretty strongly about that as far as geometry goes and how you feel planted and stable on loose, rough gravel. So having like a gravel bike that has maybe a little lower bottom bracket, I think is a key feature.
Would you bump up the tire clearance if you're to do it again, or do
you
have enough?
I'd probably run 35s. I don't know. Like it's they're all bikes, you know, right. Like I love my girlfriend gives me so much grief because she's like, you love underbiking. Like, you love doing like the stupidest stuff on the stupidest bikes. I'm like, yeah, but it also keeps your skills sharp. I mean, I wouldn't do it on like 25s, but I would, you know, like something manageable. I think anything over like 40 millimeter wide tires, and it feels slow to me. It just like, it's a lot more inertia and a lot more mass to kind of keep rolling. So my attitude for Trans Iowa was also travel light, freeze at night. So I sort of intentionally, and the same thing with the Oregon Outback, I intentionally like underprepared. Like, I didn't give myself an opportunity to like stop or sleep or I mean, so I was like fully committed, which,
Right.
20-year-old Ira, that's what I did.
Nice. So we got a question here from Masato Yoshihara. What's your favorite bike that you have in your shed right now? And what bike do you want to try to build next?
I mean, I don't have a lot right now because I'm sort of in a transitional period. But my single speed cross bike is probably the bike that is my go-to fun bike. It's just so simple. It's like, knobby tires, pretty approachable gearing. That's definitely the bike that is kind of like I want to go for an hour-long bike ride in the neighborhood. That's the bike I would ride because it's just so much fun. The bike I want to build for myself next is going to be like a bike packing 29er rigid 29er bike packing bike.
Cool.
Probably with a Columbus carbon fork, just to be able to put mounts on it. I've had a bike like that in the past with the Old Man Mountain front rack and then a walled basket on the front. And that's, I don't know. I love for bike packing with a front basket is just maybe, I mean, not for like super extreme stuff, but for just average, bike touring, bike packing. It's great. I love the basket up front. It's like the pickup truck. You just throw everything up there. So that'll probably be the bike I build for myself next.
Nice. Speaking of pickup trucks, Steve Fuller asks, do you have the Pink Portour back from around 2007-8?
I do not. That was a really cool bike that I rode. I actually messengered on that bike for a long time. But yeah, I built a one-by geared Portier with like a big front rack on it. And that bike was awesome. I do not have that. I don't know where that is now. I don't know. At a certain point, they're hard to keep track of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Chad here has kind of a more frame building question. Where do you buy frame tubing? Is there a particular type of tubes that you always go to?
I really like the Columbus tube set in general, or the Columbus tubes in general. They definitely have the longest history and the longest pedigree of frame tubing, like specific frame tubing specs. And their catalog is so deep as far as, diameters and lengths and butts. And so if you're building a custom bike, it's great to be able to sort of mix and match to really tune the bike for the rider and the rider's style. And then they also have a number of like shaped tubes. So if somebody wanted something a little bit more non-traditional with like a, like a arrow shaped tube, the Columbus catalog is definitely the way to go there. I think the quality, like consistency and quality, is also really good with Columbus. They're really great. And then as far as where I source those tubes from, there's a handful of vendors around. There's one here in Portland called Framebuilder Supply, and Tony Tepe over at Framebuilder Supply does a really great job of fully stocked Columbus tubing, and then he does a bunch of lugs and a bunch of other stuff. He's also, just being a small one-person shop, it's nice to be able to talk to him about what my specific needs are, and then customize and sort of maybe get stuff fabricated locally.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, how was frame building during the pandemic? Was there a holdup on tubes? Like, what was that whole period like?
I feel like the pandemic, in a lot of ways, kind of kicked off. It's such a terrible way to describe it, but it like Italy was hit really hard initially. And I think that did affect the Italian, like the tubing manufacturing process to some degree. But frame building domestically is so niche. I mean, you're not talking about shoes or even bicycle parts, which are like consumed, by the millions, comparatively to. So the supply chain was less affected for bicycle specific materials. but yeah, I mean, there were some bumps along the road. It made it tricky for sure. I think the parts supply was a much bigger issue that was confronted the entire industry more so than just the bicycle frame building part.
Did you guys get I know we interviewed Paul and some other US kind of manufacturers, and they saw like a big bump in sales. Did you guys experience the same thing with frames?
Yes. Yeah. I think, you know, the people that were, I don't want to say isolated from the pandemic, but the people who had jobs where they could work from home, work remotely very easily. It's like the upper end of the bracket, it's the upper end of the socioeconomic food chain. So, and bicycles were inherently pandemic friendly, it's like they were socially distanced, and it was also like, I think a lot of people reprioritized their lives and like a lot of values that they had sort of around how they spent their time. So I think, yeah, we saw a huge jump in sales and bike interest, on top of not being able to get it, not being able to walk into your local bike shop and, you go in with like a $2,000 budget and the only thing they have is like an $8,000 bike, and you're like,
right.
Well, I guess I'll take it. So it was a wild time,
Yeah.
So
let's see. Someone here has a geometry question. What is the lowest bottom bracket you would use? Like how low is too low?
the limbo question. Well, for what kind of bike? I guess I would say for a road bike, I would probably wouldn't go much lower than like 72 millimeters of drop. My sweet spots, the ones that the kind of the zone that I like, is between 68 and 72. So pretty narrow range, but and a lot of that also has to do with like how long the chainstays are. There's a lot of other variables. Like the bottom bracket height is something that that kind of narrows it in a lot of ways, and kind of like, I think it really kind of defines how the bike feels in a lot of ways. But there's so many other variables with like what makes a bike good. But yeah, for road, I would probably do like a 72 to 70 millimeter drop. And then for cross, I would probably do like a 68 to 70. So somewhere in there. It really depends on like how the rider is going to use it and like what their style is. If they're like a sprinter or a hill climber, that's going to be probably a higher bottom bracket. Whereas somebody that's looking for stability or something that's going to be like a gravel bike or be used on really rough stuff, I'd use a little bit lower bottom bracket. Yeah.
Cool. Andrew Stringer asks, curious what kind of bikes Ira is most interested in building. Let's tackle that part of the question first. Is there a bike that you kind of gravitate towards when you want to build something?
I think I really like that like fat tire road bike, cyclocross bike. Like in my mind, for recreational riding, and whether that's, primarily road riding, but road, gravel, like things you would want to do to the type of riding you would get on the bike and want to sort of go and like clear out your head and just go and have like a couple of hours of reset. Like a road bike with rim brakes and long reach calipers, I think is kind of that's the kind of bike that I'm most interested in. Yeah, I think like road and cross are kind of the two bikes that I kind of gravitate towards.
Yeah. So let's see.
I do have some curiosity. I really do want to build more bikes with baskets, like the functional utility side. That's something I want to, that's a area I want to go into. It also gets tricky because there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of production bikes that are really check off those boxes really well. And it's just, it's difficult to compete with that on a custom level.
Yeah. So the second part is, do you think there's a space for bikes that can do lots of things, including racing? What does that bike look like? I guess if you had to build a bike that was a complete all-rounder, but you could also potentially race on it, what would it be?
That's tricky because that's a question that I think a lot of people bring to custom builders, is like, I want the Swiss Army bike. I want the bike. I want the one bike that can do all these different things. And the conclusion that I've come to over the years is, yes, you can build a bike that does a lot of those things, but it won't do any one of those things very well. So it's really about asking yourself, what's the percentage of time you want to spend doing each one of these things, and how are you going to using that as like a way to prioritize the design and like which direction you want to go with it. So I mean, you can race on anything. You can, you can race on you can race on a cruiser if you wanted to. But it's just like, how competitive do you want to be? So yeah, I think like a really nice lightweight cross bike, it kind of offers the most. When I think about the bikes that I have that kind of fill the most spots, and like as a gravel bike and as a pretty good all-around road bike, and light enough and kind of sporty enough to be a race bike, and I would think it would be a cross bike, because then you'd basically just sort of change you essentially just change the tires and you change the wheels and you have a different setup. So yeah, I would say cross bike, probably go in that direction.
Cool. Yeah, I've kind of come to the same conclusion testing bikes. Like I've probably tested close to 100 bikes on the channel. And initially, my first few years was trying to find that perfect all-rounder. But then there's like this existential doubt. It's like, well, it does it pretty good, but doesn't do it awesome.
Yeah.
And at some point, it's better to have kind of more stratified or defined bikes for, I don't know, for maximum enjoyment of that one aspect.
Yeah, you kind of figure out the parameters of your, like I want like a full-on mountain bike, and I want like a full-on road bike, and then kind of like everything that happens in between, because yeah, there's a lot of room there. There's a lot of boxes to check off.
Yeah. So here's a question from Aaron. Why did you decide to set up your business in Portland, and how does the location influence your design philosophy?
I like that. That's a good question. I set up my business here because this is where I was. I have lived in Portland for over 21 years. And when I moved here, Portland was a very different place. And there was I got a job as a bike messenger right away. And that kind of like plugged me into this like just amazing network of beer drinking buddies. and also just, I think at that point, like Portland was pretty punk, and it was really inexpensive as far as like cost of living. And so you just saw this like intensity of small business entrepreneurs, and I wouldn't even necessarily call them entrepreneurs, just people who are moving here or lived here and kind of saw opportunities to create something. And especially in the bike world, there was a really great, there's just a really solid community of people who wanted to make bike stuff and like, build bike things, build bike community, build bike infrastructure. And I think that at the time it dovetailed really well with I think 20 plus years ago, the long-term like Portland infrastructure plan to create a city that was more bike friendly, like with a very intentional focus, had already been like 10 or 15 years in the making. And those are the sorts of things that don't just happen overnight. You can't just sort of like come up with a plan and then hit go and it happens. So when I moved here, that was already in motion, and it just kind of created this great environment of cycling culture, and it was livable, and it still is livable comparatively, but yeah, it's changed a lot. So
yeah, were there many builders at the time when you first landed in Portland?
No, there weren't. There was Andy Newlands, who still builds strawberry bikes, and then Sasha White, who was building vanilla at the time, and there were a handful of others. but then I think between like 2005, 2004, and like 2009, you just saw this like huge explosion of, Portland being like bicycle frame builder town. And so it just kind of like, it just blew up. And it was great. But it was also not sustainable. There's just like, it's cool to just see everybody feeling the capacity to sort of like hang their shingle and try it in their own way. So there was just this amazing like community of creative people, and everybody coming at it from such a different angle. And then you just saw sort of like a maturation of that, as somebody who just started building frames and just started, like developing their business, and they had a 4-year wait list, and you're just like, is that sustainable? No, and then, in the background, the bigger bike companies, or even like the smaller bike companies, the production companies were essentially kind of like seeing what the hand-built world was doing, and then kind of like designing some of those, mass producing some of those key elements and bringing them to the market. So it made it really hard. I mean, you had to, it was hard scrabbled for a while there.
Do you think it's easier now, or when you started frame building, to start a frame building business? Like there seems like there's a lot more tools for promotion, but is it also like more saturated? Like,
I think it's harder now. I mean,
right.
I think like the overhead cost, like materials are expensive, getting set up. I just went through the process of getting my business insurance set up, and that is like incredibly expensive. And talking to the insurance person about that, I think a lot of that was because of the e-bike world. So like all of, if you're trying to set up an account with somebody and if you tell them that you're going to build e-bikes, that's like such a huge liability of just like, it's scary, you're like, oh, you're just going to put some crazy Chinese battery on this thing and it's going to burst into flames. I'm like, no, it's not how I do it. So yeah, I think now is a lot harder for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah. As far as like how the location influences my design philosophy, I think like urban riding, city riding, like the sense of utility is massive. Like I love that I love seeing people riding like their 30-year-old giant with a milk crate strapped to the back, and they've like, that's their bike. Like they ride that every single day to work. And just like, I love that kind of like those diehard bike commuters that you see in Portland. There's not as many as it used to be, but I love that aspect.
Yeah, sure. So Michael Mann, who's from Portland, do you still prefer to build cross bikes with rim brakes?
My personal preference, yes. But I also understand that it's not what everybody wants. I think rim brakes are lighter. They're, easier to work on. Disc brakes just slow you down. They just don't do as much. I think, I mean, for a real cross bike, I think being able to anticipate the terrain and anticipate your need for braking and slowing is important. I think for how a lot of people ride, I think disc brakes make a lot more sense. And disc brake technology has come so far in the last like 15, 20 years, just massive. So I think that disc brakes definitely have a place.
Yeah. Arjun asks, do you have any thoughts on gearbox systems like Pinion or Effigear? Have you done much gearbox stuff?
No, I have not. I think it's great. It doesn't. My opinion about a lot of those systems are that they centralize a lot of the weight on the frame, and I think that it adversely affects how the bike rides. I get it from a sense of functionality. It's just not. It's not my bag. So yeah. I've heard of Pinion, but I haven't heard of Effigear. So I'll have to do a little bit of research about that.
Yeah. I always get asked questions about gearbox stuff, and They're expensive.
Yeah.
Like I can go down to co-op and get half a dozen derailleurs and mess around and make videos, but you're in it for a big chunk of change, and sometimes the bikes require very specific bottom bracket or rear dropout, and they're just not as I don't know, MacGyverable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fixturing on the frame building side is more complex too. It's just, it's more dedicated. That being said, the cool thing about the custom frame building world is that there are people. There's if somebody is interested in something that doesn't align with what I build, I would, somebody is interested in opinion, call up Joseph Ahern. Joseph Ahern, he does that stuff so well, and it's awesome. So it's great to be in a community of people that are, there's something for everybody out there. The opinion Gearbox setup is great, and if you want that, Joseph's the guy.
Joseph's your man.
Yeah, totally.
Matt Ford asked, are there any kinds of bikes you dislike building or don't want to build?
Probably fat bikes. Just because I just don't have any experience with them. And it's not to say that they're bad, because more bikes, yes, more bikes. But fat bikes, fat bikes are something that I don't really, or like crazy TT bikes, like aero, super crazy aero bikes. Those are just styles of riding that I don't, that are a little too nichey for me. But there's so much regionality to frame builders too. You can usually find somebody in a specific part of the world that sort of has that understanding of types of bikes.
Yeah, cool. So we've got 170 people in the chat. If you guys have questions for Ira, put it in the comments below. Let's see, just scrolling through.
Come on, front derailleurs. No, just
kidding. What are your thoughts on the front derailleurs? As a terrible invention as people make it out to be?
No, I love a good 2x. I think a front derailleur setup or 3x. I don't know. I like some. It's that sort of antiquated technology. It's mechanical and approachable, and you can modify it in your own house with your own basic tool set. I think front derailleurs are great. I have a long-standing opinion that the bike industry is so cyclical, pun not intended, but it's just ideas always come back. You've been posting these photos of old ads in the back of Bicycling magazine of bike packing gear and packs that are go from a pannier to a backpack, and you can carry your bike in them. It's just all of these crazy ideas. And then if you even go farther back, there's a Japanese book called the Data Book, which is a collection of it's mostly French drawings or French ideas from the constructeur period of the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And there's suspension in there. There's there's sealed bearings. There's all sorts of inventions and all sorts of technology that's in there that you see now, but they just didn't have the means to mass produce it, or they didn't have the materials. That's where being able to machine aluminum or TIG weld or 3D print stuff. There's just all of this technology that we have now accessible that we can create these ideas. But it doesn't mean it's brand new. So I think simple technology has a place, and I think sometimes that might be the solution. It's instead of perpetually looking forward for technology to save us from ourselves, maybe we just need to look in the garage, right. Or go look in the milk crate full of derailleurs and see, maybe the answer's in there.
Yeah, I've been having a kick at going to the adventure cycling library, because they have every bicycling from when it started, like 1965 or 64 to present day, and just going through, and it's like the problems and the issues that they had in the 60s are pretty similar to the ones we have now. But yeah, like getting a kick out of like the bike touring gear, and how like the yard sale photo where everyone like lays their stuff out and they're like posed with it like they were doing it back then.
Yeah. They're knolling is the way. Yeah, that's amazing. I totally forgot that adventure cycling is in Missoula, and what an amazing resource to have in your town. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let's see. We sell forever. What are the biggest challenges with going off on your own, and what's the best part?
They're one and the same. The biggest challenge, yeah, just like running a small business. I think like managing the expenses and the parts that are hard. And I think a lot of our like socioeconomic system structure is not set up to like benefit small business people. And I think that part just as it's really hard. I think that's like that's definitely one of the biggest challenges. But that's also the thing that I love about it, is like the puzzle, being able to be scrappy and be, innovative and work my ass off. And just kind of, yeah, I think that's also the best part, is like when it's bad and it's hard, it's all on you. And there's like there's no one to bail you out. But it's also when it's great and everything's going really good, and you get to celebrate those successes all on your own. And that's huge. So yeah, they're kind of one and the same on that question.
Yeah. So Arjun asked another question. What do you think is the future of frame building in the US? Will larger production ever come back with automation and 3D printing? Do you have any thoughts or opinions on like reshoring, like mass produced bike frames?
That's a tricky question, because I really try hard not to be a pessimist. I want bikes to be part of the answer to a lot of the questions in the world right now. And I think like domestic manufacturing, I think, is huge. I think that would be incredible. But I don't know, the trajectory of like where we are going culturally, I think is like that would be a hard one. I think as far as like the means to produce frames domestically on a mass level, I think it's really hard, because so much of the the production integration of how bikes are built, and not just frames, but like complete bikes, is so integrated overseas, so it's like you see how these cities are built up, and it's like there's a bike factory, and then just down the road there's like the parts manufacturer, and then just down the road there's tires. So it's like to be able to sort of like put all of those pieces together cohesively in overseas is just so much less expensive. And it's just, and they meaning Asia, or we have done such a good job of offshoring those things and building up those systems in those places that I think it's going to be really hard to pull that back. I would love to see it. I would love to see like these machines, like the Bridgeport, like, I mean, that was like a factory machine in the 40s. But I just don't know that would be applicable. I think automation, bike frames are always handmade. Even if they're production, they're still made by hand. And that's where just getting like a good human welder is the key. 3D printing is great. I don't know that it's ever going to be like scalable to like a mass production sort of level. But yeah, I mean, there's tons of technology out there. I mean, even just TIG welding in the last 20, 30, 40 years, I think has like revolutionized production frames. Before that, everything was fillet brazed or lugged. And all the lugs were using brass. So that was like the fastest method for mass producing frames back in the day. And then TIG came along, and now it just like blows everything away. It's so fast.
Yeah. I think I remember a couple years ago, there was some talk of maybe Brompton setting up shop in the US, like producing, but they just like their hiccup was like finding the welders. Like there just wasn't that deep of a pool or enough people. Yeah.
Would they have, so Bromptons are actually fillet brazed, which is kind of amazing. So they use these like huge torches. They're like jet engines, and they just basically get the entire joint so hot. And then they just have this like massive brass rod. And so it's a very traditional form of fabrication. But and they make it really fast, but that's really interesting. I had no idea that they were considering moving to the US. That would be amazing. I would love to see that. More bikes.
Yeah. Let's see. So C. Fuller asks, who's a frame builder, living or not, whose body of work you really admire?
I would, Dario Pegoretti is kind of amazing. Rest in peace, Dario. I think his production mindset is just like cranks him out. I think that was really cool. I think, and just, he's Italian. If you ask my girlfriend, I'm like obsessed with everything Italy. She's like, oh, Italy? Really? Here we go again. Oh, but this cafe in Milan, it was just so amazing. But having met Dario and like been to his shop and just kind of knowing his history and how he was the contract builder for a lot of other brands, I think that was really kind of an amazing, just the amount of frames he built was just incredible. So I think that was pretty cool. And like style wise, they were kind of like at the pinnacle of technology. I think living frame builders who I really admire, Richard Sachs is kind of amazing. He builds one style of bike, but he does it really, really, really well. So I think that's pretty amazing. And he's also been around. He's been a huge supporter of other builders. Like he's a proponent of a collection of lifers in the bike industry. So I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah. Cool. So Michael asks, are you going to have a booth at the Made show in late August? Yeah.
Yes.
Thumbs up.
Yes. Yeah. I can't remember exactly where I'm going to be, like which booth number it is. But yeah, I'm going to be there. I'll be bringing my best stuff. So cool. I'm super excited. It'll be nice to be able to have Portland host a super bike nerd event again.
I feel like it's been a while.
Yeah, I think the last one was NABS, and I can't remember what year that was. It was like maybe 2010, 2011. It was a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So we've got 188 people in the chat. If you guys have a question for Ira, put in the comment box.
Let's get up to 200. Invite your friends.
There you go. Let's see. Andrew asks, as a frame builder, what are your thoughts on sliding dropouts? Do you work with that stuff pretty often or no?
I've built with sliding dropouts a handful of times. I think they're great. I like the idea of a sliding dropout more than a dropout or more than a elliptical eccentric bottom bracket for doing like a single speed. The disc part of the equation, if you're building a bike with disc brakes, that makes it a little tricky. But yeah, I think a sliding dropout's a good solution in a lot of cases. Paragon Machine Works out of California makes some of the best like dropouts and frame building materials. So I think they definitely have the sliding dropouts on lock.
Cool. So Jim asks, friction versus index. I think everyone knows which way I like to shift, but do you shift friction at all, or what was your last friction shifting bike?
I would say index personally. That's my personal flavor. I think I have 10 speed on my Trans Iowa bike, and honestly, like having tried to shift friction on a 10 speed setup, it's tricky. And then like trying to do that on 11 or 12 is just ridiculous. You're like constantly overshifting. So yeah, I'm a little retro grouchy, but I would say probably index. Sorry, Jim. Sorry, not sorry.
So Peter asks, what's the current weight on the new Ira Ryan rig?
Right now, I'll probably be finished up with the orders I have right now in like midsummer. So if you call me today or email me today, please do. We could have it ready for the fall, like late summer, early fall.
So what are you offering any like semi-production frame designs, or is it all like one-offs, or what's? Everything
is going to be built by me right now. And so, yeah, I'm sort of thinking about, I really would just want to get set up and like get some frames done and really try to get into a rhythm in the shop. And then once I establish a rhythm and a sequence and a cadence a little bit, then I will kind of see about like what's out there. So what sort of opportunities or what people want also, because that's constantly changing, like it's really a matter of like, what can I bring of value to the world? I don't just want to make things that don't get used. A bike that hangs on the wall is not living its best life. So I really want to be able to I want to be able to like really plan strategically around it. So
yeah. Well, ATBs are going to be the new hotness.
Yeah, I think like a 26, like a 27.5 or 29er, like ATB with like a Unicrown fork with like the capacity to do flat bars and baskets on the front is, I think that's the bike I want to build for myself. So
nice.
I think, yeah.
Let's see. The sergeant asks, I see that Bridgeport and the hard engine in the background. Do you have any shop tour videos online?
I don't, but doing more videos is definitely on the list. Yeah, the Bridgeport's actually Chris Eigelhart's old Bridgeport. So there have been a lot of Eigelhart forks and bikes built on that Bridgeport. So I personally, I have a lot of sentimentality for that thing. And then this little gray, it's actually a Vernon mill, a little Vernon horizontal. That was the first mill I ever had. And that was basically kind of what I built all my bikes on before. So yeah, those are the two big machines. But I will definitely do some shop videos. I don't have any right now, but look for them in the future. I hear video is like the wave of the future. I got to get on that.
It's the gravel of social media or something.
Right?
I don't know.
Yes.
All right. So we're at an hour. We'll do this one last question because I think this is probably one that people will be curious about. Who will do your painting? Seems like paint is often the holdup in getting a frame to customers.
Yeah, paint can be tricky. I have a really great relationship with Eric and Bethany at Colorworks, Colorworks Palette. And they used to be down in Eugene, but now they're out kind of in the country near Mackenzie Bridge, which is an amazing place to ride bikes if you're ever out there. And they'll continue to do my paint. So, and that we have a great system there. They are typically about like 2 or 3 weeks for turnaround time. So yeah, Colorworks Eric and Bethany will do my work, do the paint schemes.
Cool. Well, I think we'll take it home. Is there anything else that people should know before we wrap it all up?
Ride more bikes.
Ride more bikes.
Yeah, this has been really fun. I really appreciate the opportunity to get online and do a little bit of a shop tour for what's going on back here. But yeah, this has been really great. It's been awesome to also like follow the front derailleur and shifter process. I love what you guys do in Montana.
Cool. Thanks. Well, I guess we'll see you in August at the Made Show, which would be super fun.
Yeah. If anybody has any questions, you can email me at iraryancycles@gmail.com. Yeah, I'd love to build some bikes for some folks.
Cool. Well, thank you, Ira, for joining us on the live stream. If you guys enjoyed this chat, be sure to subscribe, join us on Patreon, or better yet, pick up a Save the Front Derailleur sticker in the merch store. Another quick note, YouTube just recently is going deep with podcasts. So all these interviews are going to be available on YouTube's podcast platform. I just have to make the playlist. And we've spoken to like a ton of super really interesting bikey people that you can binge watch. So look for that soon. And as always, everybody, keep the supple side down.